Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. I'm getting ready to cast on the third sock in my cubicle socks trio. These socks are worked from the toe up and start with what's known as a pinhole or a circular cast on. The pinhole cast on can be worked around either an odd or even number of stitches. And after your stitches are cast on, you can knit flat in rows or in the round. Today, since I'm casting on this socks pattern, I'll be casting on an even number of stitches in the round, and I'll demonstrate both English and Continental styles so you can choose which version is most comfortable for you. Let's get started. The pinhole cast on begins with what crocheters may recognize as a magic ring. So you just twist the yarn to make a little loop. And I'm going to put that loop onto my index finger and pull the working yarn just to tighten it up slightly. And then I'm going to pinch with my thumb to hold both the tail and the working yarn in place. And you can see I've left a relatively short yarn tail, just enough that I can weave it in later. As we cast on, we'll alternate between making a yarn over and knitting a stitch through the ring. And I'll be casting on 8 stitches. I'm going to kind of pinch my needle there just to hold it in place as I tension my yarn. We'll start with a yarn over, so I'll bring the yarn forward towards me and over the needle. At this point, the working yarn isn't anchored at all, so you just need to be kind of careful that you don't slip everything out of place. And then I'm going to knit a stitch through the ring. So I'm going to go through that ring under both strands, and I'm inserting my needle from the front to the back, knitwise, wrap the yarn, and then pull the stitch back through. And now everything is anchored a little bit better. So again, I'll yarn over by bringing the yarn forward and over, and then knit a stitch through the ring. So go through the ring knitwise, front to back, wrap the yarn, and then pull that stitch back through the ring. Now, I could cast on all 8 stitches onto a single needle and then separate them so that I can work in the round using my favorite small circumference method. Instead, I usually prefer just to divide my stitches as I'm casting on. So I'm going to slide my stitches down the needle a little bit so they don't fall off. I'll get my second needle to cast on the next 4 stitches. So I'll start with the yarn over. So the yarn comes forward and over just that second needle. And then knit a stitch through the ring. Yarn over and knit a stitch through the ring. At this point, I can take my index finger out of the magic ring. And when I pull on this yarn tail, you can see that the ring magically shrinks up. And I'm not going to pull it all the way shut at this point. I'm going to leave a little bit of slack in there, and I will pull it completely tight after I've knit the first round. So now that all 8 stitches are cast on, I can use my favorite small circumference knitting method to knit in the round. So this was the last stitch I cast on. I'll rotate my work. This is the first stitch I cast on. I can move all those stitches down to the tip of the needle, and then I can work in the round, first across the first 4 stitches and then the next 4 stitches. The pinhole cast on begins with what crocheters may recognize as a magic ring. So I'm going to start by tensioning my yarn over under the fingers on my left hand so that I'm ready to knit. And then I'm going to make the magic ring by just grabbing the yarn and twisting it to make a little loop. And I'm going to loop that yarn over my middle finger. And then just gently tighten things up and pinch with my thumb to hold everything in place. And you can see I haven't left a terribly long yarn tail, just enough to weave things in later on. as we cast on, we'll alternate between making a yarn over and knitting a stitch through this ring. And I'll be casting on 8 stitches. So I'll start with a yarn over, so the yarn comes forward and over the right hand needle. Since the stitch isn't anchored yet, I'm going to hold it in place with my index finger. And then I'm going to knit a stitch through the ring. So I'm going to go through the ring under both strands from the front to the back, knitwise, knit a stitch, and then pull that stitch back through the ring. And now everything's anchored a whole lot better. And I have 2 stitches on my needle. So yarn over by bringing the yarn forward and over. I'll hold it in place with my index finger and then knit a stitch through the ring by going through the ring knitwise with your needle, grabbing the yarn and pulling that stitch back through. And I have 4 stitches cast on. Now I could continue and cast on all 8 stitches onto a single needle and then separate them. So I could start knitting in the round using my favorite small circumference knitting method, whatever that may be. I usually find it easiest just to separate my stitches right now. So I'm going to cast on another 4 stitches onto a separate needle. So I'll get my second needle and we'll continue alternating. So first it's a yarn over, the yarn comes forward and over that second needle, and then I'll knit a stitch through the ring, yarn over, and then knit a stitch through the ring. Once all of my stitches are cast on, I can remove my finger from that magic ring and I can pull on the yarn tail here, and when I pull on the yarn tail, that magic ring tightens up. So I'll close it up, not quite all the way right now. I'm going to leave just a little bit of slack and leave that ring open just a little bit as I knit that first round so that my stitches aren't too tight, and then I'll close things up by pulling the tail when I get done with the first round. So this is the last stitch that I just cast on. To begin knitting in the round, I'll rotate, and then I can start knitting in the round with the first stitch I cast on, work around the first 4 stitches, rotate, and then knit across the second 4 stitches, and finally tighten up that yarn tail. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do the pinhole or circular cast on, both English and Continental style. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to support our knitting tutorials or try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for the Cubicle Socks Trio. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!